This podcast will contain spoilers for The World of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, Elio Garcia, and Linda Antonsen, and spoilers for all books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. R. Martin. Welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave. This episode will be the latest in our ongoing series in the World of Ice and Fire. This time around, we'll be discussing the sections covering the Iron Islands and the Ironborn culture and history. My name is Zach, also known as Alias in the Podcast of Ice and Fire forums, and joining me, we have Greg.
Hello, this is Claudius the Fool in the forums.
And Patrick.
Hey, Patrick the Toll in the forums.
And Alex.
Howdy, Lucky Charms on the forums.
Very good. So the way we'll be doing this will be by going through this section to section, briefly summarizing the major points in each and bringing up various speculations, thoughts, and questions we have on that. But first, I just want to ask you guys what your favorite new piece of information was, and if reading this had a positive or negative impact on your opinion of the Ironborn. What do you think, Greg?
Well, I think overall it definitely gave a lot of depth to them, and the thing that I kind of liked the best was that the whole, you know, with Balon and the old way and we do not so, like, that's actually kind of a return to the old way. It hasn't been like that the whole time, which I kind of didn't get. But when you find out that he kind of had to, like, you know, cancel all his father's decrees and everything and force the people to be, you know, badass again, that was a part that I really liked. And just some little stuff, you know, along the way. But that was my favorite kind of, you know, of the more recent history. I liked getting some info on, you know, Quelon, because Quelon's mentioned so much, you know, and his loins. But
and that sort of exchange from Quelon to Balon is kind of like a microcosm for the entire history of Ironborn culture, and I think we'll be getting into this a lot. The fact that they're oscillating so much between the Reaving culture and modernizing themselves, kind of like civilizing themselves a bit. It just constantly, every time it seems like they're going to make progress, something happens. And
yeah, the trade's always a good thing, but it's like they have to fight among their, you know, in their drive to not trade. Right. Like, I want to take this from you. I don't want you to pay me.
Exactly, and it's just like constantly falling back. Like every time it seems like something good is going to happen, something else snatches it away, and sometimes it's not even their fault. Like there's some like random bad stuff that goes on throughout the history that kind of screws things up for them, and we'll get into that. But first, what about you, Patrick? Favorite part and such?
Oh, I think it's the whole legend behind the Ironborn. I think the whole, except Naga and the Grey King and everything like that. It kind of gave me. Yeah, I've always known that I would like them if I got to know them more. But now that I'm learned about their backstory and their legends, I just feel that they're even more awesome than they were before. So yeah.
Cool. How about you, Alex?
Well, I can recall first reading Clash of Kings and learning that the Ironborn were such a fearsome naval power, but there's no timber on the island. So How the hell do they make the ships? So a lot of the sort of raw material goods and the sort of economy of the Iron Islands, and also the sort of political philosophy of the last Huare kings, Harwin and his father, which we will discuss.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Like when you think about it, and we've known this for a while, but the whole notion of the Kingsmoot is so much more democratic than pretty much any other area of Westeros has, and it didn't sustain itself necessarily. There was like a ton of moments where, primogeniture kind of took over, but I think that's really just a cool, like, unique facet of this particular culture and the way it's evolved. That at least during the early times, they had a sort of democratic way of electing their leaders. That's probably my favorite takeaway of the stuff. Even though we knew it, I liked getting more depth on that and kind of how it originated and how that history informed what the characters did in the books proper. But like I say, even with that, like they eventually get away from it, and for like centuries they're getting away from it. And in general, like this is the thing that frustrates me, and that despite the fact that I think it improved my opinion of the Ironborn and gave them more sort of depth, was the fact that it's just so frustrating reading their history, because it's this I don't know, it's this exercise in them gaining something and then they fall back on old traditions, or they lose it somehow by whatever means. Like they take control of some of the mainland Westeros, they lose it because of lax, ruling after they've conquered, which is fair. They're a reaving culture. They aren't known for their ability to maintain their land, and that's not really what they're after, maybe. But still, it's frustrating, I think, to have all these moments throughout their history where they're like, all right, we've kind of improved here, and then all of a sudden they're back down in the dumps.
Yeah, it seems like they have, anytime they do kind of like peak, that it's always because of a very strong leader and who's got some revolutionary ideas and is very successful. But then when he dies, it just goes right back to the fighting amongst the infighting, and then the revolutions, and then someone's raised up and then they're killed. It's like there's no. I mean, there are a couple of parts where the Maester mentions like there was relative peace, so we're not going to talk about this time period. But there's no peaceful transitions, and it seems like the Kingsmoot's supposed to make it a peaceful transition.
Right.
And like in the ancient days, there was, but every pre Greyjoy, like everything up till then seemed like it was not many peaceful transitions.
It's strange to me that they do have the Kingsmoot as sort of their history, and sort of in spite of it, like there constantly are these bloody wars of succession. And I wonder if maybe it's because of the Kingsmoot that they expect that they have less I don't know, mythical acceptance of primogeniture and like accepting rulers, and they're constantly vying for control because they feel that everyone has a chance of being worthy if they can prove it.
Yeah, I had a question just like before we start like on the stuff just about the Iron Islands themselves. If I could ask, I never thought that they could support the kind of numbers that would needed to do what they did. And did reading this make you believe more that they had it, just because the islands seem like they're so small compared to the people that they're conquering, and the ships of 100 ships in a fleet had 20 or 30 guys in a boat, and plus all the slaves and the thralls. Like, it just seems like they don't have the numbers. But I couldn't really wrap my head around the reality that they could do what they did.
Yeah, I've thought a little about this as well, but I don't think it's necessary for because it really comes up to if they do you have to employ the right what is it called, strategics? Strategy. Sorry, you have to employ the right strategy, and you might be able to hold key points before it gets like Theon tried to do. Essentially, you do need to have a support train, support for the hinterland, but I think it could be possible, but I haven't seen a number of ships that is beyond the 100 longships, which is in on the low side. So if you use 100 longships, you had 1,000 men, sort of, because that's how big their longships are. Mm-hmm. So that
so if you go by the numbers of an army, like every fighting soldier's got 3 or 4 people who have to be supporting him, not like personally, but to till the land, get the and in the baggage train and support. And it just seems like they don't have that.
But you
got like 2 towns in this whole thing, and everything is just like scattered steadings and can't grow anything. It's just, I don't get where they're getting. I know they're taking stuff when they rape and pillage and all that, but
sure. Greg, but the difference is that like the Viking Age, they had 2 jobs. They had the raider job, and they had their normal craft. They could be warriors and craftsmen at the same time. I'm not disbelieving the notion of them doing this just on the notion of that because Vikings did it.
Right. No, it was tough for me to wrap my head around, but yeah, Ragnar Lothbrok was a farmer also.
I think reading it made me think that they do have more numbers than maybe I initially thought, but I agree with you that maybe not as much as would seem entirely feasible to be able to do what they did at times. But I think a big part of it is the fact that they have such dominance at sea, and that offers them such an ability to catch people by surprise, and to be more mobile, and to just have just a competitive edge in the environments where they are where they're making their attacks happen, which is on the coasts typically. It becomes trickier when they start moving further inland, and I think we see that they can capitalize on some kind of weakness, but after that they just have no means to sustain themselves for long.
Yeah, but numbers-wise, you do also have to remember that they take a lot of women and make them sole wives and put sons in them.
Okay, yeah, so they could have a higher
they could exactly. Then they might do in other lands, because they would need to have that to muster 10,000 Ironborn for a raid. That would be pretty extensive if you don't. On that soil at least.
That is true. And I do think that the lands are a lot larger. The islands are a lot larger than I gave them credit for initially. I don't know how much necessarily, but I do think they are. Like Old Wick and stuff, or Wick itself are quite large, so they can't sustain those numbers, I think. But with that said, let's move into our sort of main discussion, beginning with the first section the book offers in The World of Ice and Fire, generally on the Iron Islands. Lots of general information, sort of out of context from history, about their various cultural aspects. The Drowned God and oppositional deities, with the Storm God being their religion. I actually just wanted to know if you guys knew, is there any other instance of sort of the oppositional deities besides the Drowned God and the Storm God, and also R'hllor and the Great Other in the books?
Ellipses.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there might be, because of course we get, like in Feast for Crows, like these instances of so many different religions at play in Essos and stuff. So I'm sure there are others, but I can't think of any. Which, I don't think there's anything really to be said for that. Obviously, there's the crackpot theory that there's some kind of connection between R'hllor and the Red God and the Drowned God, but I don't think so, personally.
Well, yeah, if there were a connection, it wouldn't be like R'hllor was the Drowned God. R'hllor would definitely be the Storm God, though.
Oh, okay, yeah. That'd be interesting if they're kind of like at the opposite sides, yeah.
Because the Great King, he tricked the Storm God into making fire and volcanoes and stuff like that. So that would fit better with R'hllor than...
Yeah, maybe there was something to that. I don't know. Also, the other thought was, we've had instances of the Red God and that religion, and to an extent also the old gods of the North having some kind of magical properties to it. Maybe not full proof that there's actually gods at work. But do you think there's anything that can be said to corroborate the claims of the drowned priests? Do you think that there's any truth to that religion?
I don't think so. I think they just discovered CPR really early, and that blew people's minds.
Yeah, that seems likely. And you don't have any of those examples of sort of magic at work with them, besides what Aaron and others kind of claim.
Right.
Except maybe like Patchface. I think that's the only.
Yeah, he's the wild card, but we don't know. Maybe he had that all along and he just never showed it. Or,
right.
He went. There's history. A lot of like shipwreck memoirs I read. They're full of people who just literally go insane when they're in the water, and maybe he just had no filter anymore and he just let his stuff out, and that's a possibility. But yeah, the water has definitely. You don't need a god under the water to drive you crazy or to change you, because you can't cope with that usually.
True, though he does have prophetic powers. Yeah. Though a lot of characters do.
Maybe he had that already.
Right. Yeah, I always thought that it was like, I always took it at face value that they were able to do stuff at the same, like in the same measure as maybe R'hllor, priests of R'hllor could. Well, mainly because of Patchface, actually, because I thought that he must have been like blessed by, or cursed, however you want to look at it, by the Drowned God, or as we now maybe be thinking, the Deep Ones. I don't know.
Right. Strangely, I don't think they're ever mentioned in this section. Is there any mention of the Oily Stone?
No, the Oily Stone, yeah. The Black Sea Stone chair is Oily Stone.
Oh, yes, right. The Sea Stone chair is one example. So, yeah, there could be some connection there for sure, and I'm not discounting it. I think there's definitely a lot going on under the sea that we don't know about, which this is kind of actually skipping ahead a bit, but I actually want to know, do you guys think that there's truth to the myth of sea dragons and krakens? Do you think they actually exist?
I wanted some clarification as to the difference and what exactly is a sea dragon. Is there any analog to a sea dragon in our world, do you think? Or because there are krakens, there are giant, squids in our world, but what's a sea dragon?
I don't recall any specific description of like the bones of Naga or anything like that would give us any kind of analog we could use.
I was thinking perhaps prehistoric, like Mosasaur, or Plesiosaur.
It's Nessie. They're Nessie.
And I mean, maybe like the Ironborn. This probably isn't likely, but maybe the mythic Ironborn had examples of creatures that are now extinct. I don't think it's unlikely. I think that even Naga, if it doesn't live up to the size of the myth in terms of what is actually there, it's still a massive creature and something. There's something. There had to have been something to make those bones.
Yeah, I think in Norse mythology they have the same, or they have a legend of a giant sea serpent as well, right? So Jormungandr, or a Midgard serpent,
right?
So I don't know if he's just got like inspired by that and just threw it in, or if there actually was something about it in his world, at least, George's world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have real dragons, so why can't we have sea dragons, right? At least at some point in history, maybe not active in the world, the contemporary world of the main books, but I think there was something, maybe not as big or as mighty as they claimed, but there was some. All right. So another thing that I thought was interesting that I didn't really make note of when I was reading about the Ironborn in the books itself was that they do have like a lot of natural resources beyond just iron, and more so that they are able to like turn those to a purpose. They have skilled metal workers that are evidently, according to the Maester in the book, some of the best that exist. I didn't know that, so I thought that was interesting.
Even better than the Dornish people?
He made no comparisons. I don't remember any comparisons. He said second to none, I think, though. So
really?
That might just be the claim of that Maester, but yeah, I think they at least have to have more skill than I gave them credit for. I always assumed that it really was mainly reaving that they subsisted off of.
I'm also convinced that Maester Herrig is Ironborn because it sounds like an Ironborn name. So that's
well, yeah, there was the Grand Maester Herrig that he constantly cites from, and I do think you're right that he was.
It said he was born and raised on Harlaw,
right?
So he is an Ironborn.
Oh, well, there we go. So
he may be tincturing his culture.
It's interesting that of all the cultures, the Ironborn got a bit of bias, I feel. In this book. Like you'd assume they'd be very adamantly against the Ironborn with all the trouble they've caused Westeros throughout history. But it does seem like that they're pretty positively thought of in a historical context, at least in terms of their prowess, if not their sort of ethics.
Yeah, it's like Vikings, because they're awesome.
They are pretty awesome. So another big sort of theme that I was taking away from this section was the idea that there's been this sort of unavoidable cultural evolution towards reaving because of that scarcity of wood that they used to make their boats, and they're very much a seafaring culture and they need the wood. Could you guys imagine a world where the Ironborn could have set up like a fully trade economy without relying on reaving to supply them?
Nope.
No.
Simply because, well, the best analogy is the Faroe Islands and Iceland, and they mainly supported themselves by reaving, raiding Ireland and England for most parts. Because they didn't, for a long while, they didn't, at least in the Faroe Islands, didn't have anything, and they couldn't really till the lands or anything like that. So I'm pretty sure that's what he's thinking about. And at that point, the technological point they are in this book, they're not able to get enough out of the land from what they have.
Yeah, I think that's my sort of feeling that I constantly go back to too, is that ultimately they could not subsist on trade. But like some of the things that this presents makes me wonder, because I do think that they do have a lot of valuable resources that they could maybe set up some kind of trade with that would be able to sustain wood. I don't know. Like, I don't know what initially made them want to reave so much and why it felt like a necessity. But I guess ultimately, when they were getting started early on, they either didn't feel, or at least they didn't feel they needed to rely on trade when it was simply less efficient, because there's obviously an exchange going on as opposed to a one-way sort of benefit. They felt that since they had such a superiority at sea, that they could capitalize on that.
Yeah, and there might not have been that many large trade partners when they began their tradition. Cities take time to grow, and Old Town might not have been as large as it was, as it is now, or as it was at its apex. So I'm thinking maybe they just didn't have enough to be sure that they could have a stable trade even in war situations.
And even if they weren't inclined towards reaving, I do think that, especially in the past, you're right that like Old Town and all these other places, even if they were able to trade, they just were so weak to the Ironborn in terms of seafaring technology. Like they were so far behind.
Yeah,
that the Ironborn had no reason to consider sort of amicable trade relations, because they could take what they wanted. Eventually, the other people caught up, and that kind of is where the Ironborn start to get in trouble, because they can't rely on this thing that has been so deeply ingrained for so long so much anymore. So, Speaking of that, though, this isn't in the notes, but I mentioned this on the forums. And I just want to know if you more historically minded people can help me out here. Is there a precedent for the way that the Ironborn dominated at sea for so long? Like millennia, it seems like they had control of the sea, and they had such capability there and maintained it for so long. And it doesn't there was no huge technological advance in that time. It seems in terms of the way they do it. I don't know. Is that is that consistent with real world history?
Well, if I'm going to take head on this, I would say that no one civilization has had an edge like that for millennia. But as it is in fantasy, you would always exaggerate.
Right, of course.
So, but the Viking culture had a dominant position on the naval scene for 300 to 400 years, and was essentially they've been used around the whole of Europe as warriors and defenders and they had a really, really big influence on the whole of Europe when they were at their apex, and other cultures as well. As Phoenicians had a really strong naval power as well.
Carthaginians. The Carthaginians.
Okay, well you can talk about Mediterranean. I'll stick to the north.
No, I was just gonna say, because the Carthaginians were not so much. I mean, they were militarily, but they were amazing navigators, and there's all these theories that they actually made it to Brazil and South America, in the 1st century BC.
Nah, that was the Vikings.
Oh no, they got there north, but the Vikings didn't go to Brazil. I don't think they kind of stopped at
of course
Newfoundland.
But of course it did.
Yeah, but the they were descendants of the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians were the original amazing sailors of the Mediterranean. But yeah, the Carthaginians, were second to none until Rome, wiped them off the map, and then they not so much after that. But they were not so much conquering; they were definitely more of a trading and merchants, and they always had to hire armies to fight most of their battles, but they had an advantage on the seas for quite some time.
I guess the other part for me is just the general technological stagnation of Planetos. Just the fact that it seems like they've for this long period of time they've had these just all that seafaring was these boats that could get them around, and they've not advanced that in this whole period. So
that's a fantasy thing, though, right?
That's a genre trope.
Yeah.
That's actually that is a genre trope, but it is also kind of accurate for Denmark and Scandinavia. We used longboats or long ships for nigh on 1,000 years in its entirety. The last longboat was destroyed in 1458, as far as I recall, which is pretty long up in the Middle Ages, almost up to the Renaissance. So you might have to imagine that they're sailing around in their longboats next to galleons and stuff like that, and that's pretty crazy. How would you board that? How would you board a galleon from a longboat?
You don't.
Exactly. That's why it was destroyed in naval combat, nonetheless. Actually, so pretty awesome, even though. So yeah, it's actually a thing from reality that the culture that uses longboats, long ships, the most tended to use them too much.
Right. They relied on it too long.
Too long, and then they actually lost a lot on that.
Oh, that's cool. That's nice to have that real world analog, even if it's maybe not nearly as much as it is for the Ironborn. Again, you guys are right, though. It is very much a trope that this kind of this suspended evolution of
because
technology. Magic. I just imagine the Ironborn with cannons. That'd be pretty awesome. or ironclads or something.
But see, that's the thing I don't really understand. For 300 or for at least 150 years, there haven't really been that much magic in the world. And before that, between the fall of Valeria and now, it's been declining all the time. Really, right? So in that time, 400 years, that's a long time for if you want to do a low magic world. They would try to find solutions for the problems that they had solved through magic before, wouldn't they? Most people would. It's natural development for a culture, for humanity, to try to find solutions to their problems, especially if the problems usually will kill you.
Yeah, but you're comparing it to a world that has that makes sense in our world because we never had magic. We're always going forward, but when they lost it, I would think they would almost go backwards before they went forwards, because once you don't have it anymore, you can't just go forwards from there. You've got to figure out how to get almost back to even before he can go forward.
But
So
but a lot of cultures didn't even. It seems like even like the Ironborn didn't have access to magic. So wouldn't they want to try to catch up to magic even like with something else? Like I think maybe even magic
The
would be a
drown
motivator.
god's real. He's keeping him down.
Well, that's true.
yeah,
He's
sure.
holding him back. There we go.
All right, so yeah, I don't know. It definitely it's just that there's a suspension of disbelief that must be applied in terms of technology in this world. Next big thing that I think this section brought up was the whole notion of thraldom, which again we've known about for a while. It's kind of it's been this weird teetering on the edge of legality thing that has happened since Aegon's conquest. Can they or can't they do it? What do you guys make of thraldom? The argument Master Gildan kind of made was that it really does not compare to slavery. Do you agree with him based on the evidence that the people born from thralls have rights of any ironborn, and salt wives are wed by priests, children are semi-legitimate, etc., and they can't be bought or sold? Do you think that there's some kind of moral high ground in thralls that compared to slavery?
Well, Greg, don't you have something to say about Alexander or something like that?
Wait, what? Do I mention Alexander too much?
No, I'm just saying. I think there was an analogy to this as well.
We brought Alexandria up on the. What was the last podcast we did? Because I remember for the Targaryen.
Yeah, talking Targaryens.
Alex, you're up on your Roman and probably more Greek stuff. But as far as I know, like Greek and Roman slaves, they weren't literally just backbreaking work. Like there were tutors and they were scholars, and they basically were like kind of the maesters in a lot at least in the upper classes households, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but in Scandinavia then, in the Viking culture, we had thralls, and yeah, they were kind of like subsidiary peasants. They had they worked for some sort of lord, and they were bound for life to that lord. But they were in like they could live normal lives. Other than that, they just had to pay give all their food except for whatever they needed for themselves to this their owner, in a sense. And that's more or less how they did it. And sometimes they even got to go out on raids with them if they proved themselves feisty enough.
Yeah, I think there is a distinction to be made, but you can't really get past like forcibly taking people from their homes and displacing them. And
well, you're so hung up on that, you Americans.
Yeah, we had this thing called the Civil War where like slavery was a really big part of that, so it's a touchy subject still. Even though there's no racism anymore in America.
No, not at all. No racism. Oh. No, yeah, well, it's just
None.
I don't. I
was being sarcastic,
I don't think,
by the way.
No, I know.
I think we all know.
I can't tell your deadpan humor, Patrick. I can't tell what you got.
Oh, thank you. Anyways, well, in the northern culture, in Viking culture, it doesn't really, for me, compute like to what you see around in Westeros, and same as Ironborn or Viking. For me, a completely different entity than what you see in Essos and the whole gilding and how you treat them there. There you try to specifically wipe away their identity usually and make them to a tool. Of course, women in Ironborn culture don't have a lot of things to say, but the men that become thralls, they usually have a position in society, even though it's the lowest of the lowest. Is still a semi-free position where their kids can move up afterwards, which is quite interesting for me.
Yeah, I wish we had gotten like some examples or some more like context for how it sort of functions in world, like just the whole notion of like it says the kids being able to become full on Ironborn and sort of like how that works and how they become integrated into society and stuff. I would have liked more of that, but I guess you're right. It's better, maybe not good, but better than the variant of slavery practiced in most of Essos or some parts.
Yeah, you could always be completely like ideological about it and say that any kind of slavery is bad. But then again, in a medieval society, you will look at most of the commoners and think what is the difference really between them and these thralls.
Again, I think the big difference is displacing them in that part. But yeah, I understand your point. Yeah, serfs and peasants in Westeros, that sucks just as much. And if I would probably take the Iron Islands over the Riverlands personally. Like that place that you don't want to be there. So if they can get me out of there, I'm all for it. All right. Someone added to the notes on the Lonely Light in general. Any speculation on what's going on past that sort of boundary that is brought up so much?
Yeah, that's my kind of, even from the Queensmoot chapter when I think it was Gilbert Farwin gets up and he's like, "Let me be king. I will sail us into the west and we'll find the magic land." Like I kind of wanted someone at least to go there and find out what's there, because I like, it reminds me of from Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion when the Numenorians kind of go west. But if the world's round, then there has to be something there. And the fact
it would
that
just be like Essos, right? Or there's a whole other side of the globe, right, in between.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And,
I guess I'm using like real world analog, assuming Essos is Asia. And, yeah.
Well, I don't think
that's
it's
where America is.
Yeah, we're right over the end. But yeah, I like the area that, like, there's all these myths about the Farwinds and like that they're these weird people that hang out on the edge of the world, like literally on the edge of the world. And there's something going on beyond the Lonely Light, I'm pretty sure.
That is interesting. I like the name, the Lonely Light, too. Yeah. Is that like, have people done that where they've got? I don't remember. They've gone past it, but they like never return and stuff. Is that?
Yeah, they say many a bold mariner has sailed beyond the light, seeking the fabled paradise said to lie over the horizon. Right. But those who return, many do not. Speak only of boundless great ocean stretching.
Oh, didn't one of the Stark kings take like a massive navy on an expedition?
I remember the navy being burned by Brandon the Burn. I don't remember. There was the shipwright Brandon. I don't remember if he took an expedition. I think that is a thing that happened. It's been a while since I read the northern section, so I can check back on that with that one, I guess.
Oh, that's me. I think I'm doing that. Oh no, you're doing that one.
No, you're Brandon. North. I think I'm on.
Brandon, right, yes, I'm doing that one.
The shipwright. He attempted to sail across the Sunset Sea, but was never seen again. He never succeeded in his crossing, and then his son burned his father's fleet.
So when they're trying to sail to Valyria, where do they go from? Do they go to the other side of Westeros to attempt that journey? They go around it, I guess. So
you mean the Islanders?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a distinction between sailing to Valyria and sailing past the Lonely Light.
Yeah, you have to sail past Dorne, right?
Right, you have to get around. Okay. I just wasn't, the whole mechanics of that I was never clear on. I've like perpetually, when I first read the books, I was confusing which side the Iron Islands was on in relation to Essos. But they're not in the Narrow Sea. They're on the outside.
See, if they were located in the middle of the Narrow Sea, they'd be like the greatest traders in the world. They would literally be the center of everything.
Yeah, that is very true. Alrighty, I think that pretty much covers everything that I found interesting in the Iron Islands. Is there something you guys feel I missed before we move on to the Grey King and all that stuff?
We have a Lord of the Rings homage very early. Sauron Salt Tongue.
Yeah.
Oh, is that? I missed that. Yeah.
Really? You missed Sauron Salt?
Apparently so. Is there some kind of part of the Salt Tongue part that has relation to Sauron, or is it just the name?
Well, when he was in the Second Age, he basically like convinced the Numenorians to kill themselves with his words.
I
don't know if that's
okay.
Or that's just a clever alliteration.
Perhaps. Alrighty, let's move on to Driftwood Crowns, the next section that pretty much covers the mythological history of the Ironborn into the establishment of the Iron Kings. Beginning with the Grey King, who is kind of like the key mythical figure in Ironborn history, along with Galen Whitestaff, the drowned priest. General thoughts on him? Do you think there's any truth to this myth, this sort of myth of the Ironborn's beginnings, and how they were the 16 sons sort of were divided from him, and that's where the great houses originate? It's at odds, I guess, with the more historical remembering of how the Iron Kings were established. I think, right? There's like some kind of like contention there, I think.
Well, it's hard to say because every other house has some sort of hero connected to them. Why not the Great? The Iron Islands as well. If you say that Brandon the Builder is like a real person,
we have evidence for him, I guess. If you buy the fact that he built the wall.
Well, you do as well. You have
Naga, right?
these, Naga. So
that is fair. I think that this probably maybe not as. I think the enduring truth between all of them maybe is that they maybe aren't as mythologically badass as they are claimed to be in the stories. Like the stories have grown in time, but there was some truth to it that spawned them, I think.
Yeah.
And I can buy the part about the 16 sons and all that. I think that actually could be true.
I think it's too easy.
Too easy? Maybe
Garth
not.
Garth Greenhand had 100 kids, and they all founded their own. Yeah, it's simplifying mythological history.
Yeah, it's probably simplified. That's true.
Yeah.
But it sort of is the basis for like the way that the historical way that we understand the beginnings of the Ironborn was that they were these like different houses ruling these different islands, the Rock King and the Salt King on each. So I don't know.
That was very fascinating. My original reading, I thought it would just be like a simple like dual monarchy, but the sort of the division of jurisdiction and like legal precedent it's very consul and proconsul-esque.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're not as like not barbarian, but they're not as uncivilized as you, or at least I kind of thought they were, compared to the other, great houses of Westeros.
Yeah, I originally, like, my impression was that it was sort of like, and they apparently there are instances of this, was that it was typically like the father was the Rock King and the son was the Salt King. The son was kind of like had an office under where he would do more of the militant type stuff, it seemed. But evidently that is not the only instance. There were plenty of like non-familial Rock King Salt King combos.
Yeah. Have anybody played like Vampire the Masquerade role playing or something like that?
I've not.
Okay, well, they tend to have a heavy biblical references and base all their mythology on the Bible or on like semi-biblical texts. And well, they have a 13 sons of Cain became
Jacob, and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They became the 13 different clans of vampires that exist in the world, or something like that. So that kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, that is a good comparison. Yeah, I think that that also, I mean, that errs on the mythological side, and I think that Greg is probably right that it was not nearly that neat. But I do think that there had to be something like that splintered them into these different groups. I don't know if they all came from the same place though. I don't know. It's so weird to like imagine like a island culture sort of developing.
Maybe it was all the islands are like the tips of mountains, and originally it was another land, and it sunk, and they all got stuck in the island.
Oh,
what?
That could, it's possible. I mean,
yeah, and them and the deep ones are actually related. They're just the ones that stayed. Yeah, like in the Bravos, like we talked in Bravos. Like the deep ones are living underwater, and the Ironborn are living above water.
Perhaps. I'm very curious to learn more about the deep ones and how they factor in. If they do at all, I think it might just be an Easter egg on the part of George. I don't know. We shall see. Other big mythical figure besides the Grey King being Galen Whitestaff. Evidently, he was the one who united the Iron Islands and established a High King. Again, I assume this had to have happened because there's probably enough evidence to support it. Or they would not be making this myth. Like there had to be instances of High Kings in the past and them working together as a group rather than warring sort of islands. How far do you think this truth goes about this guy who brought them all together, established the King's Moot and stuff?
Moses? You mean Moses?
Yes, just like Moses.
I was thinking more Gandalf just because of the staff, but yeah.
Galen Whitestaff. I did have that sort of Gandalf-y picture in my head, for sure. Cool guy. I assume he seemed like a cool dude. Again, another example of him having all these high-minded ideals, and then later on people not. I think there's even a direct quote like Galen Whitestaff was not there to stop them from breaking apart and devolving into infighting. I think there was some truth to this too, though. I think that there was a Galen Whitestaff of some description.
I just want to, before we go further, talk about the longship, the first longship part from the tree called Ig. It's a complete reference to Norse mythology. You know that, right?
That's Yggdrasil.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's quite that. I like that he included that he tried to reference.
The History of Westeros podcast, they speculated that Ig might be this sort of prime weirwood, and it's a demon because of all the blood sacrifices and human sacrifices.
Okay.
Oh.
That's interesting. I don't know how likely it is, but yeah, that's interesting.
Oh, okay. Cool.
It's a cool part of the myth, I think, just establishing this thing that is so central to the Ironborn, the longship, and I like that it is derived from history too. That's cool.
Also, it's just the whole. I think that George is kind of putting he's setting a contrast to the Viking culture, which he bases the Ironborn so much on by killing the tree and having I think it's sort of symbolical, of doing the whole vice versa. You would say you go to Asgard, which is you feel like it's in the heavens because you go through the Rainbow Bridge, stuff like that, which is you think it might be in the sky or up higher in a place. Whereas in the Ironborn religion, you go down, you get down into the depths, and you kill the tree, which is the most holy of things in
That makes me wonder if there's like some kind of curse that was derived from that sacrilege that is plaguing the Ironborn. Because I do feel like there's a lot of really bad serendipity that screws them over often throughout the history, and we'll get some examples of that moving forward. But maybe there is something to that. That is cool. And in general, like I think that you're right that I feel like George is doing a really interesting thing with the Ironborn. I think that of the cultures presented in the book, that it's one of the most nuanced and well-rounded, and I just think he's interested by it, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff there, and so that's why I was so engaged by this section in particular. All right, moving, I think, skipping ahead a bit, sort of we got all that mythical stuff. We move to Corrid the Cruel, who is remarked for taking control of much of the western shore of Westeros, like one of the biggest conquest moments in Ironborn history. But once again, that just declined thereafter. This is kind of the first example we get of that. They could conquer a lot of stuff, and a lot of stuff in this case, because like we mentioned earlier, Old Town and things like it were not nearly as prepared as they are in more contemporary periods, because they had no. This is the precedent that made them start preparing against the Ironborn. They were not ready for it, so they were able to get a lot done. So I'm just curious if like you guys think that the Ironborn are like completely incapable of ever if they're would be an instance where they could maintain control of anything on the mainland, or if Asha is right in the books and they just need to stay on the islands and make that work for them.
Euron supposes that dragons are that effective sword of Damocles they could hang over the head of Westeros.
Yeah. When they conquer a place, it's not like they seem to bring in a governor to rule. Like they just seems like they go there, they take it for as much as they can, and then the people revolt and they scare and they go away. Like they don't have that mindset of, like the Romans had, where you conquer a province, then you'd make peace, and then you take the resources, but they had a say in your government. Like I can't imagine them taking over Fair Isle and then letting the people of Fair Isle, vote at the King's Moot.
I do think that was something they were trying to do, though. They just didn't know how to handle it, or weren't as accomplished just in the governance aspect and the ruling aspect as the Romans were. Any other example you want to give? I think they did want.
The Romans are the only example.
I think they wanted to control these lands. I think that to some degree, at least for the people conquering them, did want to maintain control. Like that's what Balon wants, right? He wants to control the North. He doesn't want to sack. Maybe I don't think he just wants to sack. They just don't know how to handle it, or they don't have the strength of numbers to maintain land control.
Right. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think you have to say that their culture cannot be consolidated with the notion of keeping a hold fast in Westeros proper. I don't think they could, with the way they're living now and how the culture is built up, where they are, this is essentially the strongest decides what's right and wrong in any situation. And I think if they wanted to control for a longer while, control Westeros or parts of Westeros, they needed to lose what makes them Ironborn, and that's
okay. So it's culturally ingrained to be this reaving culture, and they would never adapt to being a sort of ruling kind of.
Yeah, but every time they tried to do that, where it looked like they were doing that, you had the first king who read a book, and people were like, he's awful.
Exactly. That's what always goes on, and I think you guys are right on that. It's so ingrained, this reaving mindset, that every time they try to sort of integrate themselves, it's so derided culturally that they can't make it happen. They're so against that notion.
Yeah, to be fair, Harren the Black probably wouldn't have been thrown out
if not for Aegon.
If not for Aegon, yeah.
Yeah, that's like what I'm saying about like maybe there being a curse, because that seemed like an example of them. They could have made it work with Harrenhal if not for Aegon and the conquest.
There could have been like a syncretic Ironborn Riverlands culture. Yeah,
for sure. I think it's definitely possible. I don't think they would have declined necessarily if not for, again, that serendipitous event of Aegon's here just in time to burn down Harrenhal and kill Harren the Black. And too bad for you guys.
Yeah, they were having a good thing going on there, and then Aegon came and ruined it all.
Yeah.
Stupid dragons.
They need those sea dragons, I guess, or dragons of their own, as you say, Alex, and Euron is planning. We'll see how that works out for them.
Any day now.
Any day, indeed. All right, let's move on to the Iron King section. Not much I have written down here. Basically, it's the moment where they sort of get rid of the King's Moot. They sort of move towards a more primogeniture style with Euron Red Hand / Urin the Fourth Grey Iron being the big one to kill the rivals of the Kingsmoot and establish his own right of succession as king of the Iron Islands and sort of the first big dynasty, I think. And the Rock Kings and Salt Kings were, rather than being kings, they were made his vassals and lords, and that kind of is the big paradigm shift for the Iron Islands.
Well, I think it's just the whole thing with the evolution of rule. Yeah. That to gain more unity, you have to relinquish freedom to some higher instance, like a high king or something like that. So I think that's more or less what's happening here, and they sort of benefited from it.
Yeah.
But then again, they didn't. So it's hard to know what's better, but because hereditary rule is never like the best solution, in my opinion, at least.
Let's move on to the Black Blood, which is kind of the big one of the.
Oh, we do get the finger dance. I know you guys brought that up on the Essos one, but it was nice.
It was in here, yeah.
Get it actually explained. I kind of always thought that's what it was, but it was nice to have it like written down.
I'm pretty sure they mentioned it in the books proper about throwing axes and catching them. I think that was in the books.
Well, also just stupid. Why?
Yeah.
just play chess.
Yeah, why didn't they just play chess? I don't know.
Yeah, those games would end with a lot of flipped over boards and people stabbed.
Yeah. They'd end up cutting each other's fingers off anyway, so it's a wash ultimately. Alrighty, again, moving on to the Black Blood, which is kind of the major dynasty that is set up before the Greyjoys for the Ironborn, the House Hoare kings. Big opening moment that we get about this is that the Andals arrived and were the first sort of, because they didn't cross off like a land bridge, they had to cross to or go to Westeros with their own seafaring sort of capabilities. They were the first to really challenge the Ironborn, and in doing so they stormed the lands like they did everywhere else and kind of brought them to heel as they did with a lot of Westeros. But ultimately, and this is kind of another big paradigm shift with them, and they ended up sort of making an alliance with them, intermarrying as they did with a lot of First Men cultures, and sort of integrated the Ironborn more into Westeros a bit with the Andal relations. Other big note I made, we sort of get instances of the House Hoare kings throughout history. I love their names, and I think that this is even mentioned in the text itself. They have awesome names like Wolfgar the Widowmaker, Horgan Priest Killer, Oathgar the Soulless. They sound like the orcs in Shadow of Mordor, the game.
This was where I think it was Harmon the Host is the one who read a book, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
But this is, you get the first inklings of what they can accomplish,
right.
with what they later do with Harren and everything. But I didn't have much particularly on this section, but I really like this. This is maybe my favorite painting of the whole section of Harwin Hoare.
Right.
It's got that weird like aura about him, and this guy means business, but he's also likes fancy clothes.
It is definitely another example of like the sort of oscillation and even the benefit, like you said, Patrick, of this united culture. They did have this moment of pretty heavy trade, sort of redefinition of the iron price, because they were selling iron for wood and instead of reaving. But ultimately, like we've been saying before, there's such a cultural stigma against this behavior that the Harmon brothers, which were the big the guys who were sort of after this, they get their comeuppance, and the Ironborn kind of don't like some of the things they're doing, like abolishing reaving on the whole and salt wives. Like these are things that the Ironborn want so desperately to maintain culturally that they can't have that. Harmon the Handsome's wife, who is a Lannister actually, Lilia Lannister, and again another point of contention, they don't want association with the mainlands to that degree, is mutilated. And this is like the first instance of the Lannister Ironborn feud that we get. Yeah,
we get a lot of the back and forth and the seeds that are come back to haunt them later on.
Begins that war with the King of the Rock, and then they just decimate the Ironborn.
This was one of the sections where it said like tens of thousands perished in the. That's was like. They have tens of thousands of people to perish,
right.
But then they say like later on, like, and it took a generation for them to rebuild. Like,
it was also the famine that followed, the famine that followed that completely, I guess, was the nail in the coffin almost. So it took a long time to get out of that hole of the attack from the Lannisters, and also that sort of natural event. So it's another example of it looks like the Ironborn have something good going on here. Oh wait, nope. Not gonna happen. And part of it is self-inflicted, just sort of culturally. Like there was no reason why they had to aggravate the Lannisters necessarily, I don't think. So it's a mix of self-inflicting, making it harder for themselves, and also just bad luck. Alrighty, what is next? This is sort of also the moment where Reaving is beginning to be established, not in Westeros, but rather to Essos and the various islands they can reach there, the Basilisk Isles and the disputed lands and such, partially because of the new laws that are being established by people like the Harmon brothers, but also the fact that sort of Westeros is catching on to the Ironborn at this point. They are preparing because of all the times they've been burned in the past.
We also sort of get that they do have a lot of successes on land. when are we getting to Harren the Black?
Harwin, Hardhand, and stuff.
So, but that's they do have successes, and it's kind of the first time that they the Riverlands rally to them. They're like, we're going to throw off the yoke of the Storm people, and then it's not so good after.
This is the next big moment after Korra the Cruel, where they really do, like you say, make a really strong sort of incursion on land and conquer the whole Trident, even, because the part of this was sort of a convenient moment because the Riverlanders were already at war with the Stormlands, and both were weak, and the Ironborn were able to capitalize on that and sort of take control. But then again, what follows is, first of all, Halakor is an example of that disconnection from the Iron Islands culture and all the ways that
he sleeps in tents.
Exactly, that they deride him for that. Maybe this would have been an instance of them really adapting and becoming more of this mainland culture, if not for Aegon later. But first of all, I just thought it was interesting that Halak the that he tried to attack the Vale multiple times. I think there are much better potential targets than that in Westeros. I thought that was a bit of a mistake.
They probably didn't know that it was called the Bloody Gate. They were like, hey,
they were part of setting up that name, actually. They kind of helped made it happen. No, I think that happened way before, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but they had never had any interaction with the people in the Vale, really, so they're like, let's just take these people too, but not so easy.
They're over there. Let's give that a go. I think the big thing for me was they tried multiple times, thinking they could make it work. But I guess there's tons of examples of that throughout history. People thinking that they can get something going in the Vale, and they never do because that place is impenetrable. Alrighty, then we move on, of course, to the big name, one of the big names in Ironborn history, Harren the Black. He built Harrenhal. The way I have this written down in the notes is Harren the Black, Harrenhal, or arrow to Harrenhal, arrow to back to shittiness, because this is the moment where it all kind of tumbles down. Aegon shows up, the conquest begins. Harren refuses to capitulate, and he is burned for it, literally. And Harrenhal and all the power of the Ironborn in the Riverlands is lost. The Tullys rebel against them after the burning of Harrenhal, and that's sort of their establishment as their own lordship, lord paramountness in the Riverlands. That this is the moment where they get that going. Then again, just kind of back to shittiness, like I said, back to infighting on the Iron Islands because they've lost everything again. Various pretenders rose up, one being Corin Volmark, but he was defeated by Aegon. And we also get this example of this prophet / son of the drowned god Lodos, who tries to lead a bunch of Ironborn drowning themselves. His body is not found, so they don't know what happened with him. Do you think this guy actually existed?
Yeah, definitely.
You do? Do you think the one that followed the Lodos later was the same guy, or he was a pretender?
Seriously, I don't know. As I said before, I've kind of taken the whole drowned god thing, not completely literally, but take it as more than we think, more supernatural than we might think to begin with. There might be something to do with it, especially because of Patchface.
Yeah,
something might have happened, and well, maybe he wasn't. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he didn't go completely into water. Maybe he just swam to another place and was kept there for 10 years.
I picture him as a cult leader who we're gonna drink the Kool-Aid. Everybody drink your Kool-Aid. I'm gonna go drink mine over here. And then he goes behind a rock and he's come back on the beach. But I did like I said he was going to. He just put some rocks in his pocket. And he goes, I'm gonna go talk to my boss. I'll be right back. And he never comes back.
maybe that's completely a possible situation. But it is a more and more magical world we're dealing with. So maybe he did actually have something to say or did something to talk with
These
about.
Instances of magic proof true. I guess maybe it would lead credence to maybe a little bit the Victorian being Azor Ahai theory, which is
let's not encourage that theory, please.
That is my theory.
Did you listen to the most recent Boiled Leather? That was the one that they universally shat on the most.
Why do they always have to shit on?
Because Azor Ahai can't be someone we don't like. I mean, though a lot of people like Victarion, but that's another discussion.
I'm not discounting any given Azor Ahai theory at this juncture. We can't say.
One thing we can say is that it's definitely not Stannis, who everyone.
Oh yeah. Alrighty. This is the establishment of the Greyjoys, with Aegon eventually choosing his own Lord Paramount, picking Viscount Greyjoy the first in that line of Lords Paramount. A big question I have here is, do you think that was the right choice to establish Lord Paramount for the islands on the Iron Islands? Would they have been better off being subservient to the Riverlands, or would that have been its own can of worms?
He did let them choose themselves, right? He gave them the choice.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, he does allow them to choose their own. They pick Greyjoy.
I think the Ironborn are so tumultuous that if they were made vassals to the Riverlands, it would have just incited more political conflict than would have solved. There would have been rebellions and more wars.
I tend to agree. I think that the problem, though, is that that's going to be a problem even if they're not vassals. Like, they're going to be constantly a thorn in the side of Westeros. I don't think you wipe them off the map necessarily, but, it's in the options in terms of what would have ultimately benefited Westeros as a whole.
I remember there was a thread a while back in the forums, like, how do you deal with the Iron Island problem? And the only one that people agreed on was, like, you basically wipe them off the map and just send some new people there to start a new colony.
It is definitely tricky. They are like the redheaded stuff of Westeros, constantly sort of at odds with everybody else. Though, like most of Westeros isn't exactly the most congenial, happy place, so it's not like the Ironborn are a hugely odd man out. But again, establishing the Greyjoy dynasty, the one that we know of up until the point in the books. Not really a dynasty, I guess, because they're not kings. At least most of them. Vikan, he patches up the Iron Islands, kind of gets things consolidated, finds Reaving outside of Westeros, because, of course, at this point, Westeros is becoming one big thing, and Aegon is not going to take that shit, and you don't want to mess with Aegon at this point. And Vikan agrees with that sentiment, and he hammers this home to his heir, Goran Greyjoy, that you do not mess with Aegon, and part of that was allowing the Faith to return to the Iron Islands. They were kind of there before, but driven out. And I like it. I love his quote on that. We have need of wind to fill our sails, so let them preach. I thought that was just a cool little character moment for him, one of the few that we get. But again, Goran Greyjoy, big thing about him is that there's an uprising with this Lodos guy, or at least a guy claiming to be Lodos, declaring himself a priest king, and Goran Greyjoy stamps it out. And this is during the Aenys Targaryen, the guy who follows. He's the one that directly follows Aegon. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he stamps that out. Aenys lets him pick any reward for this, and as a reward, Goran tells Aenys that he wants the Faith immediately expelled. So they get there, but nope, can't have that. So they're off again for the moment. And my thought is, was that the best thing that he could have asked the king of Westeros for? Is there not something better that he could have gotten if he can get anything he wants? I guess there's a certain limit there. It's not like he's gonna I would like us to be our own land. I'd like all of Westeros, please, or something like that. He's not gonna do that.
What would you have asked if you were him?
I'd have to think about it, because like I say, there's a certain limit. I think that I don't know.
That was within his power to grant.
Right, and I don't know.
Plus, they're great. They're Ironborn. They're not going to ask for stuff that they can take. This is something that just solves a problem, and it doesn't go against any of their cultural. No, you've got to kick. Well, I guess you could kick them all out and kill them all, but it's an easy solution to a tricky problem.
But given the fact that they can't reave Westeros anymore, maybe I'd like a lifetime supply of wood from one of your kingdoms, please, or something like that.
Gotta get the Foresters and their
mighty ironwood.
Ironwoods.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I don't know. It is a petty choice. I think there could have been better options, but it makes sense again. Given all that we know about the Ironborn culture, they're so against anything that would damage their traditions, and they can't have that. So the Faith is a big example of something that could challenge their religion, and they don't want that. So it makes sense to me. I just think if it were me, maybe out of context, I would have picked something a little more beneficial to their living condition. Moving on to perhaps the most well-known, or at least the most contemporarily mythologized character in Ironborn history, Dalton Greyjoy, the Red Kraken. That is the name we get for his section. Pretty much, first question, do you guys feel like, at least of the Greyjoys, maybe not of the Ironborn, is he the most badass, coolest one around?
I think he has to be, right? Because the other ones are buried in mythological or ancient time. This guy's almost.
They're not Greyjoys either.
Oh, the Greyjoys definitely. Oh no, Theon's the best.
Oh yeah, of course. Obviously, Theon. But yeah, I mean, he has all the badass requirements. He's got a cool sword, Netfall, Valyrian steel. He took off a corsair during his reaving of the various Essos places they love to reave. He avenges his uncle, but takes a dozen wounds in the process, which gives him the name the Red Kraken because he was all bloody and stuff. And the big thing for me that I think was really interesting about him, that it seems like he had this sort of prophetic sort of intuition that something bad was about to happen. He's preparing the Ironborn for war just before the Dance of the Dragons comes about. So do you guys think there's any sort of magical aspect to him, or there's just like a convenient sort of coincidence?
I think he just knew what was happening because he was a shrewd
he was
person.
shrewd. Yeah, that's fair too.
Yeah. In that situation, I think that if you put some credence into the whole Old Town being the instigator of the shenanigans there, he might as well just been in Old Town or heard news from them about
inside information.
Yeah, inside information about this.
Had his ear to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be that out of place that he had found some, or reaved or enthralled some person that might have known something about it.
It did also say that he started reaving when he was 10, and I have trouble picturing a 10-year-old kid striking fear into the heart of these hardened battle-hardened soldiers, people they're fighting. But
it seems like it wouldn't be right, but I think that it's so recent that it's probably true. Like there's probably enough historical evidence to prove that.
Oh, I know, but like it's with our current cultural lens of think of it, your average 10-year-old. Like I could just punt him, but
well, maybe he wasn't leading the reading parties. Maybe he was
I'm sure he was included in being, protected by his uncle, but still, like just this 10-year-old kid kicking ass.
For sure, yeah, he's definitely, he got started young, that Dalton. But yeah, I agree with you guys. I think it makes sense that he probably was just a really smart guy, shrewd guy, keeping his eye on things. It's just weird, like when you think about the Ironborn, they seem very out of touch on the whole with what's going on the mainland. But I think that might just be misconception. I think that he probably had a solid idea of what was going on, and it kind of was this boiling tension that was going on throughout history with all these councils and contention of succession and so on. So it's not like it was that hard to divine necessarily. Yeah, so he was ready for that. He kind of is the big figure during the Dance of the Dragons. At the beginning, Aegon tried to get him on his side to fight against Rhaenyra and the Sea Snake, because that's kind of the other big naval power at the time, and really the only option besides some kind of help from Essos is Dalton and the Ironborn to challenge him. We get that, but then he, being the shrewd man he is, he waits to see what Rhaenyra offers, and he likes that a lot more, because she's like, oh, you don't need to fight the Sea Snake, you can do whatever you want, just mess with Aegon, and that obviously sounds a lot better, so he goes for that. And his main contribution is the sacking of the Westerlands. I don't think he had that much of an impact on the war. The Dance really he didn't really do much on the broad scope, I don't think, because the Lannisters that were on Aegon's side lost already. Like they lost in that battle, and that's why they were vulnerable in the first place. But ultimately, I think it was the more shrewd, more effective choice for the Ironborn themselves. It probably would have had less. He probably would have been more of a figure in the Dance of the Dragons if he had gone up against the Sea Snake directly.
Yeah, he would. But he would have lost.
Right, he would have probably. That's true. I don't think it was a poor choice. I just think that he seems like more of a footnote than he could have been in this specific moment. Not that that's a bad thing. It's much better to maintain your holdings and get this big win in this easy win, also in the Westerlands, and empower yourself rather than he died in this huge game-changing battle in the Narrow Sea.
Yeah, it was glorious.
He was also very, open-handed with his gifts, because he only took 4 of Lord Farman's daughters for himself, and he gave the homely one to his.
Yes, he's known for his magnanimous, his generosity, Dalton Greyjoy. But again, I think this is another moment of sort of just bad luck, maybe bad ruling, because like he gets blamed a lot for this, and I don't think it's necessarily deserved. He gets killed by this girl named Tess while he's staying at Fair Castle, and that's kind of another big moment that plunges the Ironborn back into in terms of their power. They kind of get weakened a lot here because Joanna
was Tess.
Tess.
She's a faceless man.
I don't know. I'm inclined to believe she is just anybody, but I get the speculation that she could be somebody more, especially since we have maybe not precedent, but of another instance we think of faceless men involving themselves in Ironborn succession. So with Balon. I just think I don't know why he gets so much shit for this. It seems like he was doing fine controlling this, and it was kind of just, I don't know, maybe just him being a cruel person in the bedchamber or whatnot at Faircastle, that he gets killed off by this random serving girl. It definitely feels like more like the bad luck side than bad ruling to me. Do you guys think it was his fault that this all crumbled? No, I don't think so either. And and it's written like the Maester writes it as like this was the defining moment, like the defining mistake in Ironborn history. I really don't know what the mistake was. Like it seemed like he was doing fine. He captured this land and he had control of these places. I don't think that his blunder was any worse than anyone else.
He just like had sex with the girl. You should never do that. That's what Maesters are telling you. You should never have sex.
I see. Yes, of course. I'm not saying that it was a good thing to do, but I do think like the way that he's derided for it, like I think that among the mistakes of Ironborn, that was pretty low on the scale. But what it kind of leads to is him being dead. Joanna Lannister gets the help of Leo Costain from the Reach, and they retaliate, devastate the Iron Islands, and gelded one of Dalton's sons and made him a fool. But and this is what they say, like he wasn't half so foolish as Dalton. But what was Dalton foolish about? I don't know. That was a big sticking point for me in terms of the way the Maester was explaining the situation.
He also must have been 22 when he died. Right. So he was basically a teenager.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I don't think he was nearly as foolish as he is propped up to be. I
was going to make do we hear of the Red Kraken at all in A Song of Ice and Fire? Because I know he's mentioned in Princess and the Queen, but were there any actual references to him? Like you'd think if he was this character that did all this and he'd be revered, and he was a Greyjoy, but all we hear is Quellon and Quellon and Quellon from at least from Aeron. You don't really hear much about the older Greyjoys.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's mentioned, but I don't remember any specific instances or if it being that extreme. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was brought up. He is in terms of the way he's viewed in this book, and sort of I think it might be a little bit, his contribution in history might be not as big as we think, because it was kind of a short-lived thing. Like you say, he gets killed off. So it was really his only big contribution was during the dance, and again, like I was saying, it wasn't a huge game-changing involvement. So maybe he didn't leave his mark on history as much as warrants his own section in the book. But that's pretty much it with the Red Kraken, I think. Oh, actually, I do have a question here. Is it believable that Balon would choose to attack the North, given the degree of bad blood between the Westermen and the Ironborn? I think this has been brought up before. Like, why did he choose to attack the North? We get that question a lot because we wish it hadn't happened, of course, because it's bad news for the North and kind of is one of the things leading to their downfall. But given so much of this history of animosity between the Ironborn and the Westerlands, why did Balon choose the North? I guess he did sack the Westerlands, or try to, in the first Greyjoy rebellion that he attempted.
Yeah, and then Eddard Stark took his son.
Right, and Eddard Stark took his son, killed his other kids, and yeah, I guess that makes sense to a degree, and he feels that they are the softer target. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, well, Tywin is still there, and he doesn't forgive anything really. In that sense, so if he tried to do anything and incur the wrath of the Lannisters, that would be really bad for them.
Maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. Maybe what I should be saying is, why would they ever attack the Lannisters again? It always ends badly for them. So maybe it was.
Yeah, exactly. So, and also you have to think of the geography of the North.
Yeah.
Actually, where they very vulnerable, but also in that specific area up to the Sunset Sea, they actually have a lot of woods, a lot of forests. So maybe they want also access to more timber. Maybe.
True. Yeah. I think I've kind of reversed my feeling on this. The better question is, why would you attack the Westerlands, given this history? I don't know. All right. Let's move on to one of the final sections. Actually, I think that in terms of major sections, this is the last. The Old Way and the New, kind of establishing the line of history from Dalton up to our current affairs with Balon and his brothers and such. Again, just a major point that kind of drives the Greyjoys and is part of this whole rebelling and trying to return a king. It seems like there's a consistently much larger desire to retake control of their own lands and to wear a driftwood crown. Like just that mythological obsession with kingship is so ingrained in such a big part of the Ironborn, to a greater degree than it is of the other kingdoms that kind of lost all that. It feels like they want to be independent way more desperately than the other kingdoms, and I think that is their big one of their big weaknesses is that they just can't coexist. They they want to be on their own. It's bad news when they're connected to Westeros like this. So through this, we get various Greyjoys that did things, just names, not really a whole lot on them. Dagon Greyjoy, Last Reaver during Aerys the First Reign, just known for his reaving, I guess, before that sort of got, taken away a bit. Then Alton Greyjoy, the Holy Fool, who wanted to conquer beyond the Lonely Light. I don't think we get how that worked out for him in the book, but I assume it didn't work out. He's a Ironborn, so typically we can make that core assumption. Then Torrhen Greyjoy, who swore a blood oath to bitter steel and then betrayed him. Do we get that mentioned anywhere else? That sort of connection?
No, I haven't heard about that before. So
I would like to hear more on how that played out, maybe in like Dunk and Egg or something. I don't know. Lauren Greyjoy, the borrowed tragic friendship with Desmond Mallister. We have a fabulous in quotations here.
Yeah.
I wonder.
That, of course, is tragic.
Yes. Anything's possible with that. Just a cool little historical tidbit, though. I don't think there's anything to.
No, I would think that how he phrases it, I would imagine that they are slightly fabulous. Those two.
Quite so. And then we have the guy that we've been kind of talking about throughout, Quelon Greyjoy, sort of the source of the contemporary Greyjoy concerns. He's called the wisest of the Greyjoys by Maester Yandel. He brought Maesters to the Iron Islands. Maybe that's part of the reasons why Maester Yandel was up big into him. I don't know. Helped win the War of the Nine Penny Kings for the crown. Forbade all reaving, not just reaving in Westeros, but all reaving. Outlawed thraldom, but couldn't entirely. So he just taxed salt wives and all that very heavily. And then the big question here is, again, like, if if Balon hadn't overturned all this, would this have ultimately been to the good of the Ironborn, or can they only exist efficiently or effectively as a reaving culture, or could they have eventually adapted with people like this ruling?
Well, depending really. If it was still a unified country, like with the Targaryen rule, then maybe. But in the wake of everything now, I don't think it would have worked, because you need to have a stable trade relations to a lot of people to get everything you need, because they need almost everything except for iron, tin, and whatever small iron deposits or metal deposits they have. Everything else they really need from Westeros.
They are very reliant. I think they're at a diplomatic disadvantage for sure with that, and also just like, again, all this animosity they've curried throughout history. Like, could they get those stable trade relations? I don't think so. So
yeah, most of the wars, like most modern wars, have been fought over one specific sort of resource.
Yeah,
that you need oil or iron or uranium or whatever. In one sense or another, it's been about resources. So if they don't have any access to these resources, they would be sidelined in the best of situations, and in the worst situations they would just be pawns in other lords' play, which they don't want to be. So
yeah, I think part of it, like, and again, I think this is one of the enduring themes of the Ironborn, is this: it's self-inflicted. They sort of got themselves on the bad side of everyone with this bloody history, but also it's just a natural sort of disadvantage because of their geography where they live. Their natural resources are lacking, etc., and that it's kind of like this weird, like, vicious cycle where they can't set up trades and they don't want to, so they reave, but that ends up getting them on the bad side of everyone else, and everyone else ends up doing something to harm their progress and so forth. It's a very nasty situation the Ironborn have found themselves in, and again, I think that's one of the, like, interesting but also frustrating things about their history throughout. But last thing on Quelon is that he did not want to join Robert's rebellion, but was convinced by his three eldest sons, of course, being the ones we know, Balon, Euron, and Victarion. He was convinced after Rhaegar's death, because it seemed obviously at that point that there was a winning side that you'd want to align yourself with, but in his effort to do so, he really didn't accomplish anything. He sailed some ships with them, even though he was sort of in failing health, to the Shield Islands. They got more than they gave, but Quelon died. And of course, this marks the ascension to lordship for Balon Greyjoy and all that he does. Big things being, he's kind of like, maybe like the sort of successor more so of Dalton Greyjoy. I think that's probably the best comparison we have. For the
there are
way
shades
Balon
of
looks.
that.
Yeah.
They talk about how young he was and commanded a ship when he was 16 and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I got a little bit of that.
And again, this is another big reversal for the Ironborn. He sort of reinstitutes all the practices that Quel'Tha tried to get rid of, Thraldom, Reaving and such, at least Reaving and Essos, and taxes septons heavily. He keeps maesters around because they're so useful, but he puts his own maester to death. Like we get this little mention in the book, sort of like without cause. Do you guys have any speculation?
Yeah, I just
on what?
wrote a question mark in the margins, and something was up with that. Maybe he just knew too much about his, about Balon, something Balon was hiding.
Yeah, that was kind of my sort of crackpot theory. It had something to do with the whole Euron-Aeron situation. The maester might have, I don't know, caught on to something that was
The creaking door?
Yes, the creaking door.
Oh, dear.
Oh, no.
I don't know what went on there. It's just interesting they mentioned it. I think there might be some more significance to that particular.
Or maybe the maester helped Balon kill his father, and he had to silence him to, not get the word out to anybody about his betrayal.
There could be many uninteresting explanations for what went down, or more interesting. I don't know. It just I think there had to be something going on there for it to merit a mention, but maybe that's a fallacy on my part, assuming that it had to be something because it was brought up.
No, it definitely sounds like something.
Yeah,
it definitely does. But what it is, that's up for question.
Remains to be seen. Big thing with Balon that we know well. He's got the crown lust, like many Ironborn past. He wants to rule on the Seastone chair with a Driftwood crown, and of course he tries to make that happen with the First Greyjoy Rebellion, burns the Lannister fleet, but he's defeated by Robert and Stannis and Eddard and Tywin and all, and we know all about that. The one big mention that we've obviously been over this however many times is that Stannis outfoxed Victarion at sea.
Yes, he did.
Yes, some points for good old Stannis there.
He smashed the Iron Fleet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounded begrudging, that acceptance of Stannis beating Victarion, Patrick.
Yeah, well, no, I've never diminished Stannis's accomplishments.
Yeah.
I would acknowledge that he is, besides from Victarion and maybe a few other characters in the books, he is probably one of the most badass, or maybe not badass, maybe just most respectable characters for his military prowess. So yeah, if Victarion had to
commanded from the front without a helmet, and he was in that first boat. So.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, it's if Victarion had to lose to somebody, better that it be Stannis than somebody like
Paxter.
Paxter Wine, or was he called? The fat one from Highgarden. Mace Tyrell. Yeah,
that would have been embarrassing for sure. I think you get more cred by being beat by Stannis, I guess. So again, this is another one of those big what ifs. Should Robert have killed Balon here, or should he have sort of imposed greater restrictions on the Ironborn? Would they have been better off for that?
Well, I like how Balon uses a technicality to explain the rebellion.
I only bowed to Targaryen.
Yeah, I never swore an oth to you. And bro was like, "Oh, okay, we'll just swear one now. We'll be bros." Okay, but I'm taking your kid. So yeah. But yeah, he had a chance there, but it just would have led to more revolution. And the Greyjoys had 280 years of relative stability.
That's true. I think that maybe Balon. I think the big thing might have been Balon being able to maintain control. Maybe sort of stripping him of his rights and getting someone else in his place. But I guess he had no heirs at that point, really, that could come into their own. Except, Theon would have been the heir, but he was 10 years old, so that would be the reason against that. And I don't think any of the other brothers are any better. Euron, he's the next one after, so I don't know if you want him much either. So I don't know if anything would have been better if he had killed Balon. You're right, though. It is funny that he kind of he's like, oh, I didn't bow to any I only bowed to Targaryens, and Robert just laughs at that. He's like, oh, okay, you got me. You got me. I think that's
well played.
Any other thoughts on that particular what if? Would they have been better off without Balon, or without generally punishing the Iron Islanders?
Perhaps it's meant to be a sort of passive-aggressive way to diminish Balon's prestige. If he was a worthy adversary, they would have executed him.
I see. Okay.
But by sparing him...
Oh, that probably just pissed him off even more.
Yeah, he was probably goading him, actually. He was probably goading him to get a beheading or something really badass, and then he just gets pardoned. That'll probably make me quite mad as a Lord Viking if I was. Yeah,
that's very true. And they couldn't have anticipated the degree of turmoil that would have allowed the Iron Islanders to actually make another sort of effort in Westeros to come during the War of the Five Kings. They couldn't have anticipated that, so it makes sense to me. I also don't think they would have been any better off with Euron or whatnot in control. I don't think Balon's any worse in that department, except maybe being more of a better ruler and possibly more dangerous. But I think Euron probably is just as dangerous as Balon, if not more so. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Last bit we get on the Iron Islanders is just a brief, very brief actually, sort of look at Pike as a castle. Among the castles that we get, it's probably one of the least impressive. It's just these various towers sitting on their own rocks because the parts that had united it before collapsed into the ocean. And evidently the whole thing is on a clock because this whole part of the island is subject evidently to a collapse in the future. So Pike, not the most long-lasting possible.
They're waiting for the big one.
Exactly.
That's kind of interesting that two of the main naval powers in the world are in a ticking clock for descending into the ocean.
Oh yeah, them in Braavos?
Yeah, exactly. Braavos is also slowly sinking into the water.
Indeed. I don't imagine it'll happen in any time for it to have any impact on.
Maybe they made a deal with the deep ones, and the deep ones are just claiming what's theirs.
Indeed.
I think
it must have been a few years ago. I was reading a fan fiction for A Song of Ice and Fire, and at this point in the story, someone had blown the horn of Joramun, and the wall on the east side had collapsed, and it created a tidal wave that flooded Braavos and annihilated the city. So I'm imagining that the west side of the wall collapses, creates a tidal wave, and demolishes Pike.
Why did the Horn of Joramun only collapse the east side of the wall?
Well, because Arya was the point of view character, and she was in Braavos. So I'm sure it happened to Pike as well.
Yeah, that would only make sense.
See, now that's in my freaking head.
Yeah.
Among Horn of Joramun theories, though, that's not the worst I've ever heard, which, maybe doesn't say much. Nothing else really to say, I guess. Pike, not the largest or the grandest castle on the Iron Islands. I wondered, do we know what is the biggest castle? It's probably something on like Harlaw or Wick or something.
Yeah, 10 towers or what's called.
Yeah.
Probably.
10 towers.
It does have 10. That's a lot of towers.
He's got books. He's got money. So he's got a nice digs, probably.
Certainly.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's really all I've got. Is there anything else you guys want to bring up on the Iron Islands before we wrap this podcast?
No.
Yeah.
Nope. Well, it's just nice to finally being able to think about and talk about the whole Iron Islands being sort of an analogy for the Vikings and all of those things. It makes, and I think I think George has made a lot of effort to put a lot of hints, and maybe it's not even just hints, like blatant alerts that this is there's a lot of analogies to the Vikings and their things, but also to a few other cultures, because this is instances where you think more about maybe some Mediterranean culture or something else like that instead of the Vikings, but mostly it's just, for me, it's just Vikings, and I think it's awesome because of the possibility for me to actually, promote my culture.
For sure. And I think on the whole, like I was sort of getting at earlier, for me it definitely was one of the most interesting sections in the book. I think that it was a section that George or whoever was kind of motivated to set this up was interested in really getting a lot of nuance and detail and historical homage and everything in there. And I thought it was really fun to read.
It's the longest of all the house sections, correct?
I think so. Yeah, that seems right to me.
He obviously had a lot to say, and we know if this much made it in, he probably had a lot more to say that didn't make it in.
Yeah,
but it's obviously important, and I really liked how he fleshed out their history.
Yeah, I think when I was reading it too, I was thinking wait, there's still more stuff.
Yeah, sometimes the Dawn Age and the Age of Heroes, it all just blurs into this amorphous time period, and especially when it's just King's name after King's name, it's you realize how much freaking time goes by, and they've got it was glad to get it all set down linearly at least.
For sure.
So what do you think the significance of the size of this chapter is? Is there any significance to it that this is
all right?
so
Victorian is Azor Ahai. That's the
there you go.
All right.
Well, I think that even without that, the Ironborn definitely are one of the bigger kind of at least POVs that we're getting right now in the books. Like we've got Victarion and Aeron and Asha and Theon. Like it's a pretty formidable chunk of the books. So it's definitely fair that they get their share of cultural backstory. And again, I think part of it is too that for George or whatnot, this was a part that was interesting that he wanted to develop to a pretty significant degree, that he had a lot of things to say about. So I think that's probably what it ultimately boils down to.
Don't you think it might just be that he doesn't think that he's going to address it too much in the books and in future books, so that he might just put as much as he can into this book, just so that we get it in some sort? Because as you say, as a lot of us has said through this podcast, that we had a notion of how the Ironborn were, but it really got fleshed out, and we really had some of us got a greater appreciation for the Ironborn as a culture. So I think that maybe my notion is that maybe it's just that he knows that he's not going to bring the backstory for this culture in the books. I specifically don't think there's room for that. He needs to do so much in 2 books, so that I don't think he can do that. So I think he just elaborated on the Ironborn just to get it in there, just to help people that actually want to know this.
That definitely makes sense to me. I wonder how he could have put a lot of this seamlessly into the books without it being awkward. So I think it probably was ultimately a good choice to present it in this manner. Maybe we'll get some of it more. Maybe some of this was even developed for the sake of this book, and for that reason, well, we have more information to be included in the book, sort of more history to help give us more context for the Ironborn. But like you say, this definitely improved my opinion of the Ironborn, at least as a fascinating culture to explore. Maybe I don't love them so much, and I don't know if I will.
Why? Why not?
I'm sorry, I don't know. There's just too many problems. But I think they're fascinating. I think they're one of the most interestingly nuanced cultures that this world of Westeros has to offer. So I enjoyed reading it. I'm glad we got a podcast in on it. So thank you guys for joining me for this. It was a lot of fun. Again, love talking on the Ironborn. And we'll move on next time to, I believe, the Westerlands will be the next for at least my part. And there's obviously a ton of other World of Ice and Fire podcasts to come. So
I'm going to see how long I can go without putting up the cult to arms.
Yeah.
And maybe someone else will do it.
We shall see. There's definitely a lot to come. Of course, more Essos discussion. I think the Talking Targaryens is coming down in the pipe soon, so you can look forward to that. If that's one, and of course a lot of other stuff. Lots to be talked on the World of Ice and Fire. Again, thank you guys, and we'll see you next time. Everyone listening, everyone talking on here.
Bye.
Ta-ta.